Flip-flop responses. I have noticed contradictions even within my own thought processes. I've always been the type of person to think very clearly about my beliefs. I make it a point to understand why I believe the things that I do so that my actions can be congruent with my beliefs. While making a decision in my life, I always make sure I'm comprehending the reasons behind my actions as to make the best decision possible. Figure 1 is a diagram of a phenomena that has occurred when I analyze my past decision-making over time, as I've gotten older and have had more information. The diagram maps the change in the decision I make when presented with a particular situation where there are two main options. On the sides, you see two different responses or options for how to handle the situation. The center y-axis shows the passage of time that makes the individual wiser/smarter. When confronted with many situations, as I became older and wiser, with more time passing, my decision would change from the first option to the second apparent option. This effectively represents me changing my mind. This is very common and happens all the time to all kinds of people in all kinds of situations. This is normally how we think about getting older. When we are older and wiser, we will make different decisions than when we're younger and more foolish. An example of this is how I act very differently now as opposed to when I was first able to begin making memories as a child. In these many areas, I've learned more and thus have decided that my original conclusions were not the ones I would continue to pursue. I no longer find it appropriate to throw spaghetti across the room when upset. As this diagram continues through time, however, it shows something very curious that I have experienced. After gaining even more information, and getting to an even more advanced mental position than after the original flip, I've flopped, back to the original response. That is why I call these flip-flop responses, and this shows some true mental contradiction. Flip-flop responses are curious to me because how can it be that with more information, I have not developed any better of a response to a certain situation than the emotional response I had as a child, when I had almost no thought process or information? Here is a flip-flop response that I think about all the time. When I was young, I lived near the beach. There's a very rocky section near my home where jagged cliffs are climbed up and jumped off by many children. As a child, I was very afraid of heights. My young friends and I would climb up the cliffs anyways, looking for juvenile thrills. Many times, we were at the beach and would climb the cliffs, and there would always be that moment where you all get to a good location on the cliffside, and someone would suggest jumping off from there. There is that tense moment as this daunting task lies in front of us. Social situations like these require a response from everyone in the group that is very simple. Will you jump or not jump? When I was first presented with situations like this, it was a no-brainer. Jumping is the fun option, and besides all of that, I have to do what the other children do. If I don't conform and match the other kids' bravery, I would be shown to be weaker, someone with less nerve than the others. As I got older, I started to realize all of the risks involved. It was easy for me to imagine that performing a jump like this could result in death, and as unlikely as that is the jump worth the risk? As a person, I had matured past seeking approval from others by performing stunts, and in this situation, where I already have to face my fears to get the payoff, any risk of death, injury, or pain made jumping not worth it to me. But as I got older, I began to re-examine again. I've always been a pretty coordinated person, and even though I'm afraid of heights, the possible result of death can be examined more closely than how I was looking at it before. Thinking of the most average jumps I would make at the beach, there was probably a 1 in 100 chance of sustaining some kind of injury, a 1 in 1,000 chance of sustaining a serious injury, and probably a 1 in 10,000 chance of outright death. I recognize that my life is short, but how many more opportunities will I get to plummet down off of a beachside cliff with my friends. Imagine avoiding every memory-making opportunity in your life just because there's a minuscule risk of death or injury, and then dying after living a boring life where you've done nothing memorable. In many ways, I think that might be worse than dying from jumping off the cliff. At least then, in this short life, I can go out swinging, chasing the kind of experiences that make life worth living. It's not that any risk is simply worth taking, but in a situation like this with such a low chance of disaster, I think the fun and memories are worth that risk. In a life where we often don't stop to smell the roses, not jumping is like not smelling the roses for fear of an allergic reaction to the scent. Even if you have one, it probably won't be that bad, and even if it is bad, there's virtually no chance of it being fatal. Think about the most fun and memorable experience you've ever had. I'm willing to bet that there were many moments where risks were taken. Analyzing and taking risks always demands attention to detail to avoid disaster, but fully avoiding risk altogether will lead to a bland and boring existence. The decision to move back from not jumping to jumping is ultimately a result of the risk-reward analysis, but it leads me back to the same response I chose as a child. It's not that I was wrong before, it's just that I realized that this simple situation was a lot more complicated than I realized. Many things in life are this way. The simpler you perceive something to be, the easier it is to make quick decisions about it, to classify it, or to overlook the complexity within the decision. But after more closely examining and learning to appreciate the complexity of something, you will realize that there is always more to it than meets the eye.